Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining me on the Women's Eye podcast. I'm your host, Stacey Gualandi. Now, here on the Women's Eye, we salute accomplished women and the women who write about them, like Judith Pearson and her new book, Radical Sisters, Shirley Temple Black, Rose Kushner, Evelyn Lauder, and the dawn of the breast cancer movement. Hi, Judy. Welcome back to the Women's Eye.
Davis, Stacy, thank you so much for having me.
No, this is so great. I mean, I've consumed your latest book, and I think this might be your third time on the Women's Eye, right? So
Yeah, that's right.
we are glad to have you back. So now we're going to talk all about you and Radical Sisters in just a second. But first, this episode is brought to you by CASCO Financial Group in Phoenix, Arizona. CASCO president, Catherine Scrivano, started her business to help people create the financial strength to achieve their dreams. And of course, it's my dream to have author Judith Pearson is, and you're officially a part of the Women's Eye family. Now, you return to the podcast with your brand new biography, and this really is truly a tribute, in your words, to the She-Roes who courageously dedicated their lives to the battle against the beast that is breast cancer. So, Judy, shall we meet these radical sisters?
Let's dig in.
Yes, I mean this is a subject that you know very intimately. That I wonder too is little is known of the history of breast cancer, which continues to be one of history's, I guess, most prolific killers. And I think on your website, I think you said like there's 300,000 women are diagnosed every year. What is it that has informed your decision to write this book?
So I had my own breast cancer journey in 2011. Like everybody else, it came out of the blue. It came at a bad time, but when does cancer ever come at a good time? I was a newlywed. My son was about to deploy to Afghanistan, and then I heard those words. So went through all of that. And at the end of it all, thought, and this is the real kicker, I found a lump in my cleavage 2 months after a happy mammogram letter.
Oh,
Congratulations, you're clean. See you next year. And if I hadn't felt that particular lump, by the time the rest of the cancer in my breast had made it to the surface, it would have spread. It was a very rare and aggressive kind, and my story might have ended very differently. And so when all was said and done at the other side of treatment, I started meeting other women survivors of all cancers. And their biggest thing in common, besides having cancer, was giving back to the greater good.
mm-hmm.
And so I started thinking about that. I started researching it. And I realized there is a lot of healing in helping. So I started a little nonprofit because I couldn't find the next book to write. Met the woman who became the inspiration for my first post-cancer book, which was the first one you interviewed me for.
Yep, from shadow
And
to life.
yep.
Yes.
And then that led to the Mary Lasker book. And then this book, I wanted to write about Rose because she had done so much. Um, and my editor and my agent both said, okay, but it's easier to sell books if there are some familiar names. And so
Oh,
they independently suggested Shirley Temple Black and Evelyn Lauder. And I
yes.
pushed back on it because I was like, no, I just want to write about Rose. But at the end of the day, the three of them who never met, they were probably aware of one another, but they never met. The story just flowed so beautifully. But the most important thing is that the three of them, two of whom are very well known, very privileged. Rose was just ordinary like me. All three of them, their first thoughts post cancer was, how can I help other women? And that was exactly where I started back 14 years ago after my own cancer.
Well,
So
which is really amazing though, too, because I think there's probably many directions that women can go in after a diagnosis. And I wouldn't expect that people would be immediately like, okay, I'm going to take my experience and I'm going to, share all this information. But you are among many women who have
We do.
done just that.
Exactly, exactly. And there's just, I mean, there is biological benefit to volunteering, which is really what this is. And I think on the other side of something like that, and maybe any big health scare, the sky is bluer, the grass is greener, you want to live every day, but you now have some knowledge and some skill that might help other people. So that was much more my motivation for writing this story than my own breast cancer.
But also, too, I don't know, could you have written this book had you not done all the research prior to this for your other books? I don't know. Did you know about all this history and all these women
No,
and what they had done?
no.
Because I certainly know Shirley Temple,
Well,
Shirley
yeah,
Temple Black.
right.
But, and I kind of remember that she came out, publicly about her breast cancer, but there's so much amazing information here and background and history about the start of the women's health and breast care and breast cancer movements. So thanks to you, we're getting that knowledge.
That's great. Well, and that's, then I've done my job.
But were you surprised? Let's set the stage here. We're talking like back in the 70s. Like, what was the state? What was the status of women's health and breast cancer at that time in history?
It's really remarkable. And so all of the fun part about being a biographer, and I'm such a history nerd anyway, the fun part of it is that I learn right along with readers, as I'm researching this. And so even in the 70s, women's health was very much in the dark ages. There was like this veil of secrecy, exemplified by going to a gynecologist where they put a drape over your knees and his head, because it was mostly a him. That was such a symbolic thing. And even in the 70s, and in fact, right up until the 90s, women were treated from the waist up like small men, and from the waist down, it was icky and no one wanted to talk about anything that had to do with that. Now, even though the breasts are from the waist up, as soon as they get sick, then all of a sudden they're like not as important a feature. They weren't as important a feature in the eyes of much of medicine right up into the 90s, which is really unbelievable. And in fact, Congresswoman from Colorado, Pat Schroeder,
Yeah.
said, you can bet that if 1 in 8 men was having testicles removed
I know.
every
I've,
year,
I've, I've, I've noted that in the book too. I
yeah,
bent that page back. Yes, because it's so
you could bet that they would be marching on everything to try and get testicular cancer researched and cured in some sort.
well, this is your seventh biography. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay. But you've said that this is probably your most important. Why is that? Just for that reason that we need to shine a light on just where we were and where we've come, to this point.
I think so, because and asking me, and I'm assuming other authors are like this, to pick your favorite book is like asking you to pick your favorite child. And when my older son hears this, he'll say, well, of course she would have picked me. But but I think that breast cancer it's such an emotional thing, even though heart disease kills way more women than cancer does. And more women die of lung cancer than breast cancer. It's still, breasts are the epitome and the symbol of womanhood and femininity and motherhood. And so an attack on breasts, is an attack on all of those things. So there's so much emotion, so much outrage that it took so long for the bad treatments to be done away with, and for research to really begin in earnest. I think I just feel that this particular book, you don't have to like biography, you don't have to like history, you don't have to like true stories, which of course is nonfiction, to really understand and enjoy this book. It's just like this emotional thing. Everybody knows somebody who had breast cancer, or they've had it themselves. Everybody.
Exactly. And that's probably why there is just such a collective, interest and because the relatability here,
Yeah.
and also too, it's, it is this biographical narrative, if I'm using,
Yeah.
your words, because it does, I feel like you're taking me right along with these women, and you got to know them. And it's like I could hear their voices in my head, as I'm reading this too. But if not for these women, and let's talk about these radical sisters, but if not for these three women, where would we be? I don't know. I'd hate to even think, actually, you know.
That's true. I mean, cancer didn't become survivable until widespread usage of chemotherapy, and that didn't happen until the 80s. So, and of course, not every cancer is survivable, and not every person who's diagnosed can be told that they have no evidence of disease, NED. Some of them must live with their cancer. But even those people, and in the case of breast cancer, primarily women, even those women um, can thank these women for what they've done, because they made it a public discussion. They changed legislature so that insurance company had to pay for mammograms and reconstruction. They changed how breast cancer research grants are given, and how much money is given on a national basis to breast cancer research. So all those things are so incredibly important that who knows how long it would have taken all those things to happen.
Yeah, that they had this fearlessness almost, but let's run through these three powerhouse gals, as to why you felt these three were the three important ladies to emphasize in this book.
So Shirley, America's sweetheart, had a heart for politics, and in fact ran for a state congressional seat in California in 68, I think. And after President Nixon was elected later that year, he made her not the, but a delegate to the United Nations. And she was really excited about that. That's how she really wanted to serve. And while she was getting dressed for her swearing in ceremony after her shower, her doctor had told her, this is in 1972, her doctor had long before told her about breast self exams. And she was doing her exam and found her lump. So when she had her surgery, at that time in 72, and actually right up into the 1980s, the protocol was a woman presented with something suspicious in her breast. They knocked her out for a biopsy because it was a hospitalized surgery at the time. And then they would do some pathology. If she had cancer, they never woke her back up. They just amputated her breast. And it's the most barbaric, unnecessary, medically unnecessary thing to do.
That happened to my mother-in-law. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's just awful. It's just awful. And Shirley was the first to say, the doctor can make the incision, but I'm going to make the decision. I don't want that. I want you to let me know if it's cancer, and then we'll move forward. And that's exactly what she did. And then as soon as she kind of got her wits around her about her after her surgery, she said, what can I do for my sisters? So she organized a press conference in her hospital room, and you can Google it. You can
Yeah.
Google Shirley Temple breast cancer press conference and watch the same video that I wrote this from, looking very demure and all made up with a little gardenia in her hair, talking about the importance of self breast exams and those kinds of things. And that was unheard of. I mean, the Playboy Club was doing fabulously, but the idea of a woman discovering her own breast cancer. So there were boobs at the Playboy Club,
Yeah.
but a woman touching her own boobs and saying, oh, wow, there's something here. That just wasn't talked about ever, ever,
Yeah.
ever.
For Evelyn Lauder, people probably will know that last name, and if you're big into women's cosmetics and beyond. But Evelyn Lauder is, of course, of the Estee Lauder empire. But she was someone who, and I haven't even gotten into the fact too that, okay, but tell us about Evelyn too, because there's so much about these women. It's just fascinating.
Evelyn, and actually, I have to give a shout out to Gary Lauder, Evelyn's youngest son. Family members are very important in helping with this, but he was really a lot of fun because, and he gave me a great deal of information. Evelyn was not really shy about talking about her breast cancer. She just didn't want it to be about her. And so she carried on as best as she could, working through it. She actually was one of the founding members of Look Good, Feel Better, which is an American Cancer Society program where
Yeah.
with
Hmm.
wigs and all that, because she was in the cosmetics industry. But her premise was, we've asked women to spend money on our products for decades. Now it's time for us to give back to women. And so her first project was a breast center at Memorial Sloan Kettering in New York City, set up like a department store where you go into an department store and you can buy all kinds of things. Same thing here. This was, you can get surgery, you can get chemotherapy and radiation, you can get wigs, you can have nutrition counseling, all these kinds of things. And then with her much loved oncologist who helped her with that project. Her second project was the Breast Cancer Research Foundation, which not only makes grants for researching breast cancer, but as important, they're willing to take a chance on, much like Albert Lasker in my previous book, take a chance on projects that sound really out of the box that bigger grantors don't want to mess with until you've had several rounds of experiments and clinical trials and all those kinds of
They
things.
don't want to be at the front of it. They want to
Exactly.
wait
Breast
to see.
Cancer
Yeah.
Research Foundation is like, hey, let's jump in. And then beyond that, we toss the word awareness around quite a bit these days. And I know as we go into October, people get very pink tired, pink fatigued. But
Yes.
at this time in our history, there was no awareness for the reasons that I've mentioned and probably others that'll come up in the conversation. And so making women and those who love them aware of the disease, aware of what to look for, aware of where to go get help. That was really important. So, with her good friend, the editor of Self magazine, Evelyn launched the Pink Ribbon. And that changed everything. It really did. The other part that I think is so cool. So, Princess Diana did a famous dress auction with Christie's in New York City in 1997. And she and Evelyn worked on that project together. And it was just a few weeks before she was tragically killed.
Yeah, I didn't realize that the timing of all of that, but I
I
do,
know.
but then it comes back in your memory that you know how much those things make an impact.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
also, and then of course, there's Rose Kushner, who I'm trying to think what the quote is, that she is the oh my gosh, she's just the stubborn, I wrote it down here somewhere.
Oh, she's got a stubborn streak and a loud voice.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and she's not, I don't, people didn't know people don't
Yeah.
know who she is, but if not for her, she wrote a major article in a major newspaper, which then led to a book about breast cancer. I mean, people weren't saying the word cancer, that was off limits. But she
Yeah.
was, because of her own experience, she was just a real trailblazer.
And that art, and she's no relation to the
Oh,
Kushner
that,
that we hear frequently, to no relation at all. Um, but she had written that article, and the editor said, "Yeah, maybe we'll put it in the Sunday supplement or something. It's really not for us." And then First Lady Betty Ford was
whoa.
diagnosed with breast cancer, went through that one-step procedure and a radical mastectomy, and all of a sudden, Rose's article became very pertinent.
Yeah. I mean, it's like you don't want this to happen to somebody, but because she had cancer, what her work and her diligence and her passion and love for research and all of it, we became so much more informed, and the amount of work she did on behalf of legislation, and it's just endless. And I wanted to mention too, you brought us into these women's lives, but all three of them all escaped a like a
Death.
death. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I mean,
Not related to cancer.
exactly. And so, it's almost like you think these three women were meant to do something with their lives to make
That's
an
right.
impact.
That's
Yeah.
right.
I mean, Shirley
Well,
Temple,
and just let me just interrupt real quickly. I'm sorry. So
sure.
Rose's cancer, she also discovered a lump. It was 1974. So in 1974, the American Cancer Society was doing some maybe support work for breast cancer. Reach to Recovery was the first organization um, that helped women recover use of their arms, mostly because of the horrific disfiguring surgery. But there were no support groups for breast cancer. There were no garments to wear for prosthetics. There were no books, no step-by-step guide for a woman who might have breast cancer, thinks she has breast cancer, has had it. Now, what do I do? None of that, all the psychological things. And I've said this so many times speaking and in interviews, we spend such a great deal of energy on the diagnosis and the treatment, which is important, let's be clear. But with any luck, that's like a blip on the timeline. And the survivorship is this long, hopefully, march into decades. And yet, we don't think about that. We don't think about the psychological impact that any cancer diagnosis has, much less every time you take your shirt off, there are the scars.
Yeah. I mean, that's a constant reminder. So, and the fact that they didn't want to talk about this in the first place. And then after the fact, it was just something, and all of this information was really largely forgotten, I think, too. So why is it important, do you think, that we know this now? Is it good to understand our history and maybe what still needs to be done?
Well, I think there are a couple of things. First of all, I think that a woman who is in, granted, there's about 1,000, I think, men every year who are diagnosed with breast cancer, but the vast majority are women. Um, so every time a woman is diagnosed with breast cancer, the first thought is, I really would love not to die here. This would really be great.
Yeah.
And they go through, your oncologist or your surgeon or your radiologist will go through, here's how we're going to treat this. And it's all just a big swirl in your head. But today, there is so much. And even though at first it sounds really confusing, I just think it's always good to know where it all came from. How did they come up with this stuff? How do they know that a lumpectomy will work as well as this horrible, disfiguring, no longer done radical mastectomy? How do they know I don't need chemo and just radiation? So it's kind of the backstory of that. That's number one.
Yeah.
Um, and then number two, I think, is a little bit like I was talking about at the beginning. I really hope that the book serves as a mirror that readers can see reflections of themselves and think, okay, so what would I do if I found myself in a similar position or facing any kind of a life crisis? What would my next steps be? Maybe you'd go as big as Rose did and testify before Congress, or have a breast center named after you. Maybe you just do something simple like Shirley did. She did her
Used her
pregnancy,
fame. Yeah.
right? And then she wrote a 7-page article for McCall's magazine, which came out 2 months later. And then her last thing in the breast cancer world was um, as a guest on the Mike Douglas show,
Yeah.
which was a big afternoon talk show. And then she was done with breast cancer and then she moved on. So, and what you do afterwards can be anything, can be big, it can be little. But the idea is just you can't sit home and be afraid. You can't lock yourself up. And those who have heard those words, I said this to visitors all the time and friends all the time. It's okay. You can say cancer. I know I have it, but I'm
Yeah.
going to get rid of it. It's okay.
Yeah. We're getting rid of it big
Right.
time.
And pretty
Yeah.
soon I'll show you my scar.
I know that, well, it could have the parties and then, yeah,
Yeah.
everybody starts revealing, but that's what's so amazing, though, is that they each made their mark. And
Yes.
we've even had like Kristen Dahlgren, who formerly on NBC, she started the breast cancer coalition or vaccine coalition, and
Cancer
Allison
vaccine.
Hall. What's
Yep.
that?
Cancer Vaccine Coalition.
Coalition, thank you. And then Allison Hall with Inside Edition, she's just completely bared her soul as to what she went through. So it in some ways maybe it's very cathartic for themselves too, to have them get through this by knowing that they're helping others. I think
Well,
that's it.
and so those two women, much like Shirley and Evelyn, have a stage, have a microphone, and that's important. Rose didn't have those things, but she was willing to talk, to be stubborn, to have her loud voice, and I think that's, in a small way, that's sort of what I'm doing too. Is okay, so let's talk about this and let's realize how really lucky we are. And in all honesty, I love narrative nonfiction. I mean, that's
Yeah.
right. I want it to read. I've started telling people I write historical fiction, except it's real. Because a biography, people's eyes glaze over and they expect a lot of facts and figures and boring stuff. I
No,
like
it's
if I have a conversation that one of my subjects has held with someone else, I use that as if they're actually having that conversation. So it's the history of women's health, the history of these three women, two very privileged, one just like you and me, probably just me, you're far more famous. And,
yeah, you're right.
and I think, it's fun to learn about other people and where they came from.
No, absolutely. And um, I think too, I'm curious how this affected you, like prior to writing this book and then after writing Radical Sisters. Did you change in any way?
I have. And it's funny, my husband and I were just talking about this the other day. So at first, right out of cancer, I didn't want to be called a survivor. I
Ah,
thought that sounded really puny. I mean, can you imagine General George Patton saying, "Hey, we survived the Nazis"? That wouldn't have gone well at all. You beat the Nazis.
yeah,
But on the other hand, when I wrote From Shadows to Life, I realized the importance of that word. So that changed my feeling completely. And then I used to really rail against the whole pink thing. But now that I understand it, and that's a big part too that I hope readers will take away, is that it wasn't meant to be an in your face celebration that was offensive to people whose loved ones had died because of breast cancer or who were fighting every day to survive. That's not what it is at all. It's a reminder that if you're able, donate money, help someone going through treatment, remind someone to do self exams and get a mammogram. That's what the awareness in the pink is all about. And the pink
yeah.
actually started out, as you read, started
Yep.
out as peach, not
I
pink.
know it. Oh, yeah, that's right. Because I mean, I love the color orange, but anyway, but yes, pink works.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I forgot about that. Yeah, it did start out. But yeah, I mean, that's what's amazing. But, I guess we look and as reading this and we've come a long way, baby, right?
Yep.
But are we going to find a cure? Are we going to get a vaccine that's going to take care of this horrible, horrible disease? Where are we at, do you think? Are we going to get to reduce that 300,000 number?
The more conversations like this, hopefully, the more willing women will be to, again, do self exams, get mammograms. I've heard that they're painful. I never found that they were, but I've heard they're painful. So there's that. Cancer is extremely tricky. It's almost like it's a not it is a living thing because it's our own cells that have gone rogue, but it's almost as if it's got a mind and it's listening, and they're going to try this on me, then I'm going to go that way.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
so and it's hundreds of diseases. It's not just a disease that we can find one pill for. So there's all of that, but the breakthrough in immunotherapy and teaching the body to attack wayward cells on its own, that's really cool stuff. And so, if you're ever in a position to be part of a clinical trial, which I didn't understand as I was going through the whole thing, I didn't understand what that meant. And my son, who was then in Afghanistan, his family, they were stationed in England. So we had these trips planned back and forth to support his family while he was in Afghanistan. So I declined being a part of a clinical trial. And I don't want cancer again, but
Yeah.
I encourage people. I wish I could have a do-over just for that. I would encourage people to be part of clinical trials because it's just so helpful. And a clinical trial doesn't mean they're either going to give you something to deal with your cancer or not. There is no pretend thing. You're just going to either get the current stuff or some new stuff that they've already determined works really well on humans.
That's for a whole nother podcast, is how they would do all these trials and testing and never using women.
Exactly. Even on Ambien, which they, kept diagnosing to women. It wasn't until the end of the 90s that they started including us in clinical trials.
It's just insane sometimes. I know, but it's such an amazing book. I guess my last question to you is, what do you think Rose and Shirley and Evelyn would say about your book?
I think that Evelyn and Rose would be maybe somewhat, I don't want to be front and center. Evelyn for sure. Rose wanted to change things, as did Evelyn. So I think if they could be made to understand that this could very much change women's futures, um, they'd be happy with that. Shirley wrote an autobiography, which ends in 1968 before her own cancer, and or 67,
Oh.
somewhere around there. There's a second part to it that her children are wanting to publish. And in fact, her son politely declined any interviews because they were afraid if they gave away too much of her life.
Oh,
And I was like, an autobiography is going to trump my biography anytime. I think Shirley was not afraid of publicizing her life, but she too didn't think that her cancer was a big enough part of her life that it needed to be told. So I would have had to do some fancy convincing. Long
to
story.
try to get her.
Yeah.
Well, it's amazing because I mean, I think clearly we owe these three women and everyone beyond or after a huge debt of gratitude.
And there were so many. There really were. But this by no means. One critic said, "Well, you didn't talk about this person. You didn't talk about." True. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of all walks of life, all shapes, sizes, colors, ethnicities, you name it. These were just three.
Yes. And they were an amazing uh, trio, that is for sure. So thank you so much. Gosh, Judy, this is, we could talk for hours on this. So, but what an amazing book. And I don't know, is that the next book, More Women That Made a Difference, or will you change topics, do you think?
Another woman, in fact, because the work has already begun.
Oh,
Uh, I'm leaving medicine. I'm going into the business world, and I'm writing the story of the woman who changed uh, life for women in the 1950s, which is kind of a forgotten decade for women.
yes.
60s were all about marching, and the 40s were Rosie the Riveter, but the 50s we don't hear about much. So as soon as the contract is signed, I'll blast it. And if anyone feels so inclined, I would love reviews. Hopefully good ones, but I'll take any of them.
Fabulous. So, well, Judy Pearson, thank you so much. Again, the book is Radical Sisters. To learn more about Judith Pearson and her book, Radical Sisters, just visit thewomenseye.com. And speaking of books, we have a couple of other books, 20 Women Changemakers. Go wherever you buy books, and changemakersbook.com, and 20 Women Storytellers at womenstorytellersbook.com. We love you, storytellers. Don't forget to subscribe to our newsletter and YouTube channel, and look for Judy. You're going to be doing a lot of promotion, book tour appearances, you name it. So we look forward to seeing you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Judy. Now, thanks for you all for joining me today. I'm Stacey Gualandi. We hope you'll meet us back here again soon on the Women's Eye podcast. Just remember, it's the world as we see it.